Discussants, distinguished guests, conference participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Dr. Kennedy Asembo, the Associate Director of the Global Center for Policy and Strategy. Our Chief Guest, Madam, we are gathered here to deliberate on shaping the future of climate change action plans for sustainable development in Eastern Africa. We understand that the Earth is never the same before. The level of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is currently higher than any time in our planet's history. We have already added 1.1 degrees Celsius of global warming since 1880 and are alarmingly speeding towards exceeding the 1.5 degrees perilous point. The available carbon budget for humanity is very fragile. The extreme weather events experienced over the last 20 years have been our fault, as the sea levels rise faster than ever before. The Arctic Sea is swiftly fading away, and the world wildlife population has dropped by 40% in just over 60 years. But worst of all, the world is getting angrier, hungrier, and thirstier. The message is clear: time is running out. But there is hope. We can make a difference. And so let's make the future green. We thank you for sparing your time to join us in this great event as we dialogue on the future of this planet. We value your friendship and trust in this partnership and collaboration. I want to convey to you a few housekeeping rules as we settle down to begin this event. The washrooms for the ladies are to my right as you move out of the room. The washroom for the gents are to my left as you move out of the room. In case of an emergency, the exits are marked in green. The fire assembly point is by the entrance to this hotel. The emergency teams are on standby for any eventuality. We shall conduct our deliberations with strict adherence to the Chatham House rules. That is, participants are free to communicate the content of the discussion, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers, nor that of any participant, may be revealed. Our event is fully packed, as you can see, and we shall request that we keep time. As we give comments or ask questions on the presentations during the plenary, let us be mindful of the limited time available for this event. As we embarked on our campaign to make the future green, we have a few printed copies of the program, but we kindly request you to scan the QR code on your name tag to download the program on your phone to help you follow the events. But we shall still use our screens to display the activities of the day as they unfold. We kindly request you to keep the phone on silent mode even as you use them to follow the proceedings. Our chief guest, Madam, allow me to acknowledge the able team of Gloceps board, advisors and staff under the able leadership of our Executive Director, Brigadier Dr. Kabage, who have worked tirelessly to realize this conference. We have our board members, Dr. Nicholas Ondoro and Mr. Hassan Baga. We have our Council of Advisors, retired Inspector General Joseph Boynet, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor. We have Madam Jack Mbogo, Professor Grace Njoroge, Engineer Ambassador Mabu Maalim, and retired General Lazaro Sumbeyu, and Professor Gerald Ouma of the University of Pretoria. Our non-resident fellows, Ambassador Solomon Maina, Brigadier Faustin Sirera, retired Colonel Julius Munyori, retired Colonel Godfrey Gitonga, Mr. Samuel Otieno, and Stephen Kiema have actually contributed greatly towards this event. Their guidance on this event were executed by our co-resident team, who include the heads of research pillars, Dr. John Mwangi, Mr. Wilfred Muliro, Michael Owor, who was the chair of the planning committee, Aida Gadhoni, and Steve Nduvi. They are assisted by Valtino Molo, Sherry Omulako, Dennis Muniu, and Peter Mabwa. We are indeed grateful to our admin staff, Grace Musolo, Judith Peter, Lydia Oko, Ken Ngatia, Helen Kinywa, Onesmus Kimuhu, and George Ragot. Their profiles are in the conference document and can be accessed through the QR code. I will be on standby to address your concerns and make your 2 days at this conference a memorable experience. Allow me to take this opportunity, our Chief Guest Madam, to invite our Executive Director, retired Brigadier Robert Kabage, to make his remarks. Welcome, sir.
Our chief guest this morning, Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, the National Security Advisor, the Honorable Rebecca Miano, Cabinet Secretary for the Eastern Africa Community, Arid and Semi-Arid Areas and Regional Development, our keynote speaker, the Honorable Elan Dolon, the Mayor of Lamat and the Negev Region of Israel, our keynote speaker during the closing ceremony, Professor Chem Wadiga. Our board members are led by Dr. Odolo and Mr. Hassan. Gloceps Council of Advisors, Professor Jologe and IG retired Boynet. Members of the diplomatic corps present, our esteemed moderators, expert discussants, and presenters, my team, the Gloceps team, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning once again. Yeah, it's a bright morning. It gives me great pleasure this morning to welcome you all to the Gloceps second annual conference themed on shaping the future of climate change action plans for sustainable development in Eastern Africa. Before I proceed with my remarks, I wish to briefly introduce Gloceps. Gloceps is a think tank based in Nairobi, Kenya. We were established in the year 2020. We are a leading center of excellence in policy influence and strategy formulation. We provide strategic linkage between experience and research by bringing together outstanding professionals like yourselves, thought leaders, and academia to advance key issues on peace, security, and development. Our work cuts across 5 pillars, namely security and defense pillar, the foreign policy pillar, transnational organized pillar, governance and ethics, and the development pillar. Issues climate change are domiciled in the development pillar. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as an institution and guided by our learning call for this event, The Future is Green, we feel privileged to host you for the next 2 days to advance regional and global conversations on the future of climate change challenges in Eastern Africa. The conference will take a problem-solving approach so as to provide you with an opportunity to reflect and engage in policy discussions that will steward regional stability and development at the center of climate change mitigations and adaptations. Through this approach, the conference is intended to achieve 4 objectives. 1 is to advance strategic and policy-oriented research positions on the nexus between climate change and regional security. 2 is to explore regional and global conversations on the future of climate change adaptations and mitigations. 3 is to generate options for Eastern Africa's climate change innovations and investments. And finally, to develop a roadmap for mainstreaming climate change on regional stability and development ahead of Africa's Climate Change Summit to be held here in Nairobi early next month, and the upcoming Conference of the Parties, COP28, to be held in Dubai later this year. To this end, we'll delve into critical themes that intersect at the heart of our shared concerns, the challenges and opportunities presented by climate change in Eastern Africa. On day one, that is today, we will endeavor to understand the geopolitics of climate change, investigate its intricate connections with transnational organized crimes, and examine its implications for peace-building efforts in our region. By doing so, we aim to unravel the multifaceted tapestry of challenges that our communities encounter due to climate change impacts. Additionally, through a practical reflection session on climate change mitigation and adaptations this afternoon, we will listen to the voices of Frida Mwikia, a local farmer in Makueni County, Ben Mokaya from Basigo, a local electric vehicle manufacturer, and Emilio Mogo, a former chief conservator of forest in Kenya, and Engineer Joroge, the former principal secretary in the Ministry of Energy, among other practitioners, who will give their experiences on how real-world solutions are effectively being implemented at the grassroots levels to address immediate and long-term climate change threats to our socio-economic development. On the second day, we will extensively explore the dynamic connections between sustainable development and climate change. Our focus will be to understand how technology and research can serve as essential tools in shaping our comprehensive response to climate change challenges. We will further interrogate implications of climate change on armed conflicts and come up with innovative strategies of minimizing those adverse effects to not only promote socio-economic sustainability, but also foster stability in our region. In this regard, and in line with our institution's principles of promoting partnerships and exchange of knowledge, we have put together an array of distinguished presenters from Kenya and beyond to help us critically unpackage this issue. Among the external presenters is the Honorable Mayor Elan Dolon from Israel, who will present a keynote speech on opportunities for strengthening Israel-Africa relations through climate-smart agriculture. Ms. Anna Berry from Italy will look at climate, peace, and security in fisheries management. Mr. Julius Salema from Tanzania will speak to vulnerability of coastal communities to changes in leaf source stressors. Mr. Ligan Mugune from Uganda will discuss whether financial development matters for clean energy transitions. Dr. Anwar Abdi Fatal from Somalia will discuss climate-driven conflicts and their security impact in Eastern Africa. Dr. Biel from South Sudan will update us on the implementation of South Sudan Climate Change Action Plan. Dr. Chaim from India will speak on climate change adaptations in maritime ecosystems. And Mr. Milton from Zimbabwe will discuss linkages between ecology and conflict in Eastern Africa. As an institution, we encourage you, our participants, to candidly engage them and all the other presenters, moderators, and expert discussants present in this forum. Let us challenge assumptions, promote innovative thinking, and forge analytical debates in the next 2 days. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I wish to sincerely thank all of you for accepting our invitation to be part of this gathering. Guided by the learning call for this conference, The Future is Green, and the great minds gathered in this room, I am sure that together we will contribute to making the future greener by shaping the future of climate change action plans for sustainable development in Eastern Africa. I thank you for your attention. Before I introduce the chief guest to officially open this conference, allow me to first welcome one of our distinguished guests today, the Honorable Cabinet Secretary, Minister of East African Community, Allied and Semi-Allied Lands and Regional Development, Madam Rebecca Miano, to make her remarks this morning. Madam CS.
Thank you very much, the Executive Director, and a very good morning to everyone. I've been given 5 minutes, therefore allow me to just acknowledge the protocols that have been established so that I can save a few minutes. I want to start by saying that not so long ago, climate change, to a good majority, seemed merely an obsession of restless scholars out to explore and test the horizons of science. But today, that is not anymore. That reality brings me to a curious assertion made by former US President Barack Obama during the first session of COP21, the UN Climate Change Summit on the 23rd of September 2014 in New York, and I will quote him, "We are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it." If this still holds true for the experts present in this room this morning, then I consider myself to be in the right place. And ladies and gentlemen, I note with gratitude that the theme of this conference is shaping the future of climate change action plans for sustainable development in Eastern Africa. The role of my ministry, that is the Ministry of East African Community, Arid and Semi-Arid Lands, and Regional Development in this quest is very clear. And let me illustrate briefly. The arid and semi-arid lands occupy upwards of 85% of mass. On the other hand, the Regional Development Department in my ministry is spurred by authorities created along and around rivers and large water body basins, and they cover every inch in Kenya. In the meantime, my ministry is also in charge of the State Department of East Africa Community and a board of more than 280 million residents, occupying a large part of Eastern Africa, the geographical arena captured in the theme of this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the most readily available space to plant the 15 billion trees the Kenya Kwanza government intends to grow by 2032 is obviously in the arid and semi-arid lands that are within my docket. And this is especially critical given that according to a recent United Nations Climate Action Report, deforestation, together with agriculture and other land use changes, is responsible for roughly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. While the need to cut down trees may be forced by existential logic, Failure to undertake rigorous reforestation is an antidote to maintaining a healthy environmental balance in our universe, and that is outright unacceptable. Our 6 regional authorities within my ministry have already distinguished themselves as dependable greening agents. Regarding action beyond our borders, the East African Community 7 partner states offer an excellent platform of engagement on matters climate change for the larger Eastern Africa region. The world of research has over time embraced co-production of knowledge that brings scientific inquiry to the same table with the wisdom, experience, and practices associated with indigenous knowledge more willingly. Our own arid and semi-arid land folk have a lot to offer on climate change, and we should glean the wisdom and experience they have for this sector. The perils portended by human inaction on matters climate change are potentially catastrophic, as we know. We should therefore take urgent action to avoid experiencing hotter times, severer storms, increased drought, like the one we are now coming out of, the worst in 40 years, warming and rising oceans, loss of species, inadequate food, more health risks, as well as runaway poverty and displacement. With such alarming yet foreseeable eventualities confronting humanity, the question is, how much have we communicated the grimness of unmitigated upshots of climate change and sensitized our young people right from pre-primary school to our tertiary institutions about the same? In conclusion, I am reminded of Albert Einstein, who once famously said that those who have the privilege to know have a duty to act. This room teems with people in the know and therefore charged with the duty to act. What we need is action, and the time is now. I thank you, and I sit down.
Yes, for those very insightful remarks. I am sure they'll find their place in our document after this conference. Once again, I am humbled to introduce our esteemed chief guest, Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, the National Security Advisor, who we also consider as a friend of Gloceps. Ambassador Juma has vast experiences in the areas of security, diplomacy, and strategy, and energy. Her invariable insights will therefore undoubtedly enrich our discussions and contribute to the formulation of robust action plans that will address unique climate change challenges facing the Eastern Africa region. With those few remarks, I wish to invite her to address this gathering and officially open this conference. Madam Dr. Juma.
Thank you very much, Brigadier Kabage. The Honorable Eran Doron, Mayor of Ramat Negev region of Israel, Professor Wandiga, Gloceps Council of Advisors, members of the diplomatic corps here present, representatives of state and non-state institutions, conference participants, moderators, experts and discussants, distinguished speakers and conference participants, and finally, and really very thankful to Honorable Rebecca Miano for that curtain raiser, which could have jolly well been the guest speech for this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to participate in this event, and I want to start by congratulating Gloceps for convening a reflective engagement on a critical and timely subject of the future of climate change, action plans, and their linkages to sustainable development in East Africa. I also note participants from the region and beyond, and I wish on behalf of the government to welcome you all to Kenya, your second home. 13 days today, President William Ruto will kick off the Climate Week. A day later, he, as the chair of the Committee of the African Union of Head of State on Climate, CAHOSC, will convene the inaugural Africa Climate Summit. At this meet, Africa, together with participants drawn from across the world, will frame solutions to the climate crisis. It is anticipated that the call to action out of Nairobi will galvanize the world on a climate action march that is urgent, that is scaled up, and whose governance modality will be responsive to what is an existential threat to humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, from a standpoint as indicated by Honorable Miano, where for a long time climate change was conceived as an environmental issue, today there is no ambiguity that the world is facing a global climate crisis of existential proportions. This crisis is affecting every aspect of life, the entire ecosystem, and is being experienced in every corner of the world. It is threatening the manner in which we have organized societies, and progressively, countries and states are crumbling under the weight of the consequences of climate volatility. Undoubtedly, climate change has become the foremost security threat. The exacerbating volatility, for example, in the Sahelian belt, including the number of unconstitutional changes of government, is linked directly to the stress on the lake basin, the lake, severe weather events, mass migration, diminishing freshwater supplies, disruptions to economic production systems, and changing disease vectors are adding to old and new security concerns to exacerbate fragile situations, to disrupt production systems, and to accentuate vulnerability of societies, of countries, of regions, and the entire world. So we know today that climate fragility is a real threat multiplier with pervasive impacts on other domains. For instance, when you look at human security, defined within the parameters of Sustainable Development Goals, we are seeing serious threat and stress. The current review of the status of implementation of all 17 SDGs returns a very worrying verdict. There is regression in terms of progress, and we believe, and this assessment has indicated, that we are unlikely to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by the projecting point of 2030. This shortfall is explainable in large part to the climate crisis. Among the most apparent manifestations in the growing climate-induced crisis is human displacement, today projected towards 3 times higher than displacement which is conflict-induced, both internally within countries, but also externally. We know the story about people's movements under extreme conditions, for example, through the Sahelian region into Europe, through Yemen into the Middle East, are daily occurrences with catastrophic consequences. We are witnesses to temperature spikes across the world, leading to wildfires like we are seeing today in Canada, in Europe, as we saw, and we continue to see in Hawaii last week, in the other Americas, in Australia, all of this as a result of extreme weather conditions. Similarly, we are witness to floods and cyclones in even previously calm waters. There is a growing recognition of the nexus between climate crisis and security. Across the world today, the tendency is to begin to securitize the climate space. In the 2021 report, World Climate and Security Report by the International Military Council of Climate and Security, there is a very deep analysis of the multiple crisis security risks that we face. Given the scale of the effect of the adverse weather conditions, countries are being forced to draw on, for example, and to deploy their entire security assets and capabilities in order to respond to recurrent emergencies and disaster at a scale we have never known before. We will all recall when COVID-19 happened, it became a defense issue across the world. And we have seen repeated deployment of militaries, of police, of paramilitary forces to respond to crises. The effect of this is that those countries that do not have adequate infrastructure are suffering the full effect in terms of the impact of these catastrophic events. But even in countries with these capabilities, what we are seeing is that the increasing calling in of the defense, of the security sector to respond to emergencies is actually taking away these assets from their core mandate of the defense and securing of these countries. The science, ladies and gentlemen, is clear. Humanity is at a tipping point, which, if we pass, could actually be catastrophic. In fact, they say we will not know how nature will respond to us passing that tipping point. The fundamental question, therefore, is how, in fact, whether we can pursue development in these conditions. Our success in the management of this existential threat will depend, in my view, in framing the situation and the problem correctly. The climate crisis has for a long time been viewed in binary terms. It has been a debate between emitters and non-emitters, between developed and developing countries, between frontier and economies and other economies, between emergency and development financing. The reality is that today this threat is shared by all. Raising global temperatures know no boundaries. In fact, this is a transnational threat. They lead to raising seas, impacting ocean livelihoods, destroying cities, and I want everybody to imagine the number of cities that are on the seashores in the world. In Africa, it is more than 50% of our capitals. And that is reflected everywhere because there was a link between cities and commerce and progress and wealth creation. And so, in a sense, more than a half the global wealth producing points are actually at risk just by the raising sea levels. And so, and then when you look at the changed weather conditions, which is translating into deforestation, the growth of deserts. We all know that the Sahara Desert is pushing south at an alarming rate. Diminished clean water supplies, reduction in food production, security for humans and other living beings. It is also leading to increased disease sectors, impacting on human resources and therefore productivity and so forth. While we have seen measures to mitigate these challenges of climate change, it is true that these measures have been far less adequate. They have not been sufficient because a lot of them have been taken at a localized, smaller levels. And this, I think, is a problem, because we are going to have to think about how do we scale up. I think our plans and actions must speak to the desire for scaling up, for everybody getting engaged. Secondly, the scale of the threat requires urgent action. To pull back from this catastrophe, we are told that we must cut our emissions by 40% by 2030, and we must get to net zero by 2050. It is clear from a number of quarters, including the persistent messaging that the world has been receiving from the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, that we are running out of time. In July, a few weeks ago, the Secretary General sent a chilling SOS to the world. Observing the hottest registered temperatures in Greece, the Secretary General noted that the era of global warming had ended, and that in fact, that of global boiling had begun. So the time to act is now. And so I think our plans and our strategies must speak to urgency. We cannot wait. This is not something you're going to talk about strategic plans that are coming 10, 20, 15 years. The time is now. And so we have to think, how do we organize ourselves to act now, at scale and now? Thirdly, therefore, this action must be in quantum. The scale must be commensurate to the threat. We must have action that is proportional and timely. In other words, although we have value, the activities around adaptation and mitigation, we know, are still small scale. So the question must be, how do we create quantum? How do we create quantum of action? What is required, therefore, is a change of step in the manner in which we reorient our production and wealth creation. And so what does going green mean at scale immediately? This is, I think, what our strategies must focus attention. To give traction to these three in terms of we are all in, it is urgent, we need quantum, requires huge commitment and investment, delivered in a modality that is responsive to the need and variability on the ground. It is imperative that we frame this proposal, and this explains why this proposal is being framed towards the Africa Climate Summit by President Ruto in terms of standing of a specific climate action instrument that focuses on green growth, that privileges green production and nature-based solutions, that gives the right value to scaling up response, and that creates modalities that are responsive. We believe that the current frameworks of supporting investment are inadequate by the manner in which they have been framed. Whether it is in terms of assessment of risks, they do not privilege, in a sense, nature-based solution. They do not, I mean, somebody yesterday was telling me that how you get carbon credit is by responding to destruction. What about responding to non-destruction? You know, that changes the parameters by which you assess risk, by which you access incentive. So how can we incentivize the protection of the Congo Basin rather than saying cut down and then plant trees, demonstrate planting of trees? So just turning the logic in terms of what are the elements that provide you the parameters for accessing investment. How does Africa access the right quantum of investment? By defining it as the place with the largest asset base for green growth, rather than the place of the highest perceived risk, which is even non-existent. So just turning that in terms of the financial instruments becomes a critical thing in terms of the acting now, in terms of the quantum, in terms of all of us are involved. Because it does not matter that Kenya is at 92% green on its grid if everybody else is emitting. It doesn't matter. That effort is reduced significantly because of the transnational character of the climate crisis. It is in this context that we must frame and curate our climate action plans. Thankfully, in Kenya, we have a first mover advantage. We continue to strengthen our country's path towards sustainable, climate resilient growth through robust planning. We know from our National Climate Change Action Plan the critical areas of concern that we have to focus attention, and I think which everybody within the East African region should. The need to reduce climate-related disasters and risks to communities and infrastructure. The need to enhance adaptation and mitigation through smart agriculture, through conservation of water, through circular economy. The need to have water security in order to boost resilience in terms of the blue economy and so forth. The need to increase forest cover. The need to have adaptation in the health sector so that we can reduce the risk of disease, including in terms of urban planning. As we grow, as our urban places become crowded, how do we do waste management and so forth? We need to look at conservation of energy and to push in terms of renewables. We need to think about clean cooking, clean energy and so forth. We need to decarbonize the energy sector and so forth. But this analysis, all of them, encompass very strong cross-cutting sub-themes of technology, of innovation, of inclusion, including of frontline communities, but importantly, the whole question of financial parameters, the financial access and investment. And that is why part of the conversations within the Climate Week will be what are the opportunities that are bankable for investment. And this means not just government investment, but also private sector engagement. These national actions must also be in sync with regional and international efforts that seek to mitigate the effect of climate change. And in many ways, our region is really a vanguard, has always been a vanguard. I want us to reflect that in 1996, the Horn of Africa region, having assessed that climate was its greatest challenge, created the Intergovernmental Authority on Desertification, on Drought and Desertification, basically to look at the unraveling climate conditions. Sometimes I wish we had focused attention on that. But now the discussions around strengthening IGAD, revitalizing IGAD are coming back to say, what do we need to do so that we can reduce the fragility of the Horn of Africa region? Now, the story is not all about bad, it's not an all bad story, because we know that the assets for going green are also within this region. If you think about the quantum of assets, whether it is in terms of the possibilities of renewable energy, we have solar, we have hydro, we have geothermal, we have wind. And so we have a whole plethora, we have a diverse asset base that we can use. We have a large asset base, as Honorable Miano was saying, in terms of land for forestation. We have a large asset base in terms of the market. We have a large asset base in terms of the possibility for smart agriculture and so forth. So this is the good news, that we have a policy framework, we have a good assessment, we know what assets we can bring to bear. And so part of these strategies and plans that we are going to develop is really how we connect this asset base with the investment opportunities. You must be able to say it is not all gloom, because the opportunities are there, but we must now begin to connect investment to the opportunities that are within our region in order that we can turn the situation around. It is also important, of course, at an international level, to push for commitments that have been made before, whether it is the commitments within frameworks such as Kyoto or the Paris Agreement and so forth. We know these have not been forthcoming, but it is important that there is pressure, there is conversation around how those pledges can be translated into real commitments on the ground. It is also important to enhance and synergize efforts from an all-of-government approach. As I've indicated, these partnerships must be between governments, must be with the private sector, with philanthropy, with civil society, with youth, with communities on the ground. Because as we have said, everybody has a stake in this situation. The media is particularly critical in terms of information dissemination and awareness and mobilizing for climate change. At the continental level, it is imperative that we pursue the aspirations as provided for in Vision 2063, which seeks to achieve environmentally sustainable and climate resilient economies and communities. This, of course, is in tandem with the United Nations SDGs, particularly SDG 13, which speaks to taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. In other words, the policy framework is in place. And I think the issue now is for us to truly translate those aspirations into action, as I have said, quickly in large scale, as we have said. Let me therefore mention just 3 takeaways that I think are important. One is the value of science, including research by institutions such as Gloceps, so that you can help in framing the underexplored themes in climate change mitigation and adaptation. Such agendas would be, and I think we need to place some effort in just looking at the place of indigenous knowledge systems and the potential for alternative energy sources. Secondly, it's the value of rallying common positions, particularly African common positions on climate change matters, which is an area, particularly at this time, when there is still a little bit of contestation. And you can hear it. Is it fossil fuel? And when we look at how the investment is happening, although we are saying we need to go green, you look at fossil fuel investment is still 3 times more than investment into renewable energy. How do we shift that appetite for investment towards green investment rather than the emitting investment? Thirdly, and I think for us very important, is the commitment to climate financing. It is very, very important that we find a way to balance geopolitical tensions to what is an existential threat. And it is my hope that some of these themes will find expression in the discussion in the next 2 days. And as I look forward to the outcomes of the deliberation, I know that the collective of the people here will begin to make those connections and can help us in terms of bringing some of these reviews and reflections to the Climate Summit Week in 3 weeks' time. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my humble duty to declare this Gloceps' 2nd annual conference on shaping the future of climate change action plans for sustainable development officially open. I wish you all successful deliberations.
We thank you very much, our chief guest, Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma, for the wonderful opening address. And now that the session is officially open, our technical team is Mayor Doron online. Are we on?
Yes.
Great. Allow me to take this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce to the congregation our keynote speaker today, Honorable Moya Eran Doron, who will deliver the keynote address virtually. Honorable Eran Doron dedicates his life to the development and preservation of the Negev, the fulfillment of environmental Zionist values in the spirit of David Ben-Gurion's vision, and the realization of the national mission of the State of Israel. With great faith in man and the desert, he works vigorously to build pluralistic and tolerant communities that reflect the diversity of Israeli society in the heart of the Israeli Negev. He focuses on strengthening the connection to the physical and human environment and promoting and establishing multi-generational sustainable communities that maintain the quality of community life. Eran Doron promotes inclusive and innovative education, community resilience, and a sense of belonging, all this while establishing economic independence and local leadership. In 2017, Eran was elected mayor for Ramat HaNegev Regional Council, a growing community in the heart of Israel's Negev Desert that covers around 22% of the entire area of Israel. Honorable Doron is a public servant and works tirelessly in the countless key positions in the Negev region and in the national system. He is the chairman of the local committee for planning and construction, chairman of the board of directors of Ramat HaNegev Enterprises, chairman of the education committee of all regional councils in Israel, vice chairman of East Negev cluster, board of the Nature and Parks Authority Council, board of the management of Ben Gurion Heritage Institute, member of the board of governors of Ben Gurion University of the Negev, and director of Ramat Negev's Renewable Energy Directorate. He still performs active reserve duty in an elite IDF reconnaissance unit, Shaldag, and has volunteered for more than 2 decades with the Regional Search and Rescue Unit. Eran holds a bachelor's degree in geomorphology and a master's degree in environmental studies, both from Ben Gurion University of the Negev. He is an alumnus of the Mandel Leadership Program and Maus Program for Senior Managers. I met Honorable Eran at a conference in Jerusalem in March this year and was delighted to host him on the recommendations of the Executive Director of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, Dr. Michael Leiter, as the most suitable to speak to us in this conference. Welcome, Honorable Mayor, to deliver your keynote speech.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I could not join you physically in Kenya, but it's good for the environment that I need to go to fly. I save some carbons. So once again, thank you for the invitation to speak with this honorable audience, and I'm very glad for the assembling of this conference, which is probably one of the most important ones that existing today. We see what's going on all over the globe, from Hawaii to Canada to other places, the past week or the past month, and we understand that we are in a crucial time, that despite the fact that we are now doing talking, but as the ambassador said, and it was very enlightening lecture, it's time to actions. This is the time for actions because we are running out of time, and the outcomes of the climate changes going to be so severe in the very near future that we have to do something right now, and this is what I will try to present this morning to this honorable audience. So with your permission, I will share a short presentation, since with the lack of communication and my so-so English, I will try to present something with photos that will emphasize part of the things that we understand that need to be done. Some of the things already been done, and in a way, our philosophy was always a philosophy and the policy that was and the policy that came out from this philosophy was always the understanding that we have a shortage of resources. It was always, when you live in the desert, you always understand that you are in a shortage of resources. If it's water, if it's shade, if it's temperature that are extreme and condition, and many more things that I will elaborate. And when you understand that you are in a shortage of resources, from the very first day that you do something, you will always try to expand it in a way that will be sustainable. And I think this is some of what we try to do, and I hope we can bring something good to the benefit of global production of food in the times that we're going to get into a era and period of shortage of fertile land to do the productivity of agriculture. So with your permission, I will try to present a short presentation. about our experience in the Negev desert. Just tell me if you see the presentation now. If someone, do we see it?
No, it's a picture.
So, is this what Itzik we see it? I'll try it again. Just if someone can tell me if you see it or not. Okay. I hope now we can see it. So I'll try to be as quick as I can. So we live in the desert Negev of Israel, which is 60% of the state of Israel is basically desert, and the other 40% is semi-desert, Mediterranean. That's about it. Even in the places just around Jerusalem, and some of you came and saw the forest that surrounding Jerusalem. It's all of those forests was planted in the past 100 years, not before. And previously, most of this area was covered with the Mediterranean vegetation that slowly, because of processes of construction, mostly was removed, and the area of Jerusalem was mostly buried. The Negev was always desert most of the time, but we found ruins from 1,600 years ago, 2,000 years ago, about civilization, the Nabatean and the Byzantine civilization that succeeded in the desert to do something that it's even in our eyes today. 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years afterwards, it's still standing and inspiring our imagination about the potential of doing things in the desert. And this is just an example of one of the 7 cities that we found. And in the total, we're talking about thousands of people, almost 60,000 that were living in this desert. No electricity, no running water, but they succeeded to live in this desert and make churches, make hotels, ancient hotels, and they developed a very unique technology that succeeded and provide them the opportunity to do agriculture and farming in the desert. With this inspiration of the Byzantine, we started 80 years ago, in 43 actually, the first experiment of settling people in those far remote area and doing some farming. In 47, and this is the slide I'm showing you, in 47, special mission from the UN came to the Negev because they needed to add a decision that we are today living it. It's a political decision about dividing the state of Israel, and the question was whether the Negev will be, the Negev desert will be included in the Jewish state or not. And they brought this mission into the Negev, and they showed them to the UN chairman. It was a Swedish judge. They showed him that they succeeded to grow gladiolas in the desert. He was stunned with this. He couldn't believe it, and he said, if you succeeded to raise those gladiolas in this desert, you will get it. And his recommendation to the UN Assembly in the end of 47 was that the Negev, the desert Negev, will be included in the Jewish state, and this was something for us historical. But it's, again, reflecting the opportunities of doing something in the desert that no one thought that can be done. Few years afterwards, this is the outcomes of what you saw. We have hundreds, thousands of vineyards, of places of desert farming that doing this beautiful vineyard. And with this vineyard, we have wineries, and with these wineries, we have small boutiques hotel. And suddenly, we developed our own agro-tourism economy in addition to the farming, which is the reason why we are talking this morning. But this is a great example to take the ancient terraces of the Byzantine from 1600 years ago and using current modern technology, and that's what you see, and this is just an example. So how do we do it? On your left part of this of the map of the state of Israel, you see the area of Ramat HaNegev. We have a border with Egypt, and we are halfway between the center of Israel to the south of Israel, which has border with Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan, of course. My jurisdiction is 1 million hectares. Most of the area is either practicing firing zone of the Israeli army or nature reserves of the Nature Reserve Authority. I think in this way, in some of the African states, it's similar in some way. And we produce around $200 million from production of vegetables and fruits and dairy and chickens. And this is I'll say it again, $200 million that our farmers know to produce with what we developed from the technology of how to do it in the desert. So in 80 years, from a field of gladiolas, we succeeded to bring it to $200 million a year that we know to produce. In addition, in our area, we're producing now almost 50% of the renewable energy of Israel. And this is something that the founders of the State of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, in the 50s, he already said, we have the sun that works for us, and we don't need even to pay the sun, in a way. And every morning, every evening, the sun comes, the sun goes, and we can use it. And it took another 6 decades, and today we're producing more than 50% of the renewable energy of Israel. It's not enough. Israel is in a delay in production of renewable energy from solar. Wind is not that popular in Israel, and water as well, because we have shortage of water. But sun, we have plenty. And this desert that we have, it's a high desert. Our desert is from 300 meters above sea level to 1,200 meters above sea level. So it's a high, dry desert. That's why it's also good for farming. And we are succeeding to do this renewable energy with various technology. This plant that you see, it's a thermal solar energy. I think until today, it's the highest sun tower in the world, but I think they're building now in Dubai higher. By the way, it's less economic today to use this technology. Today we are working already about the next generation of hydrogen, but still thermosolar, photovoltaic is very important, and that's what we are doing. We established with the State of Israel, and again, it's something, as the ambassador said, the private sector cannot do it by himself. Governments, for sure, cannot do it by themselves, and we need to synergize the public sector with the government, with the private sector. And this, we have a Desert Agro Studies Center that is exactly the combination of taking private sector motivation, making money, producing food, all those things that the private sector does, and with the needs of the public sector, which is the responsibility of a government or a regional council to provide people a place to live, a place to work, and of course to provide food, which everyone talks about the future, which is in big uncertainty. No one knows what people will do in 20 years in terms of what they will work, where will they live, and we don't know about so many things, and it's hard to predict it. One thing I know for sure, that in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 1,000 years from now, people will still need to eat. There is nothing that artificial intelligence can do to replace the actual photosynthesis processes in a way that will make the need to eat will be no longer useful. That's something that will need always, regardless the technology. That's why we synergize the technology with the know-how of farming in one end, and then we synergize the government needs and motivation with the public, with the private sector motivation and needs. And this is the station that we have 8 of those in all over Israel, from north to south, 8 agriculture R&D that in each part of Israel, they specialize in developing the uniqueness of this area. Now, I want to show you the investment of the government and the outcomes of what comes out of it. And so this is the outcomes. $2 million a year, the government, and we raise money mostly from the government to put $2 million, but you get afterwards, if you do it right, $100 million. It's the best investment that a government can do, because in one end they put not a lot of money, but on the other end they get people. People can work, people produce food, and a lot of influence in other circles. So this is the economical impact. So how and what do we grow? For instance, you see here a variety of fruits, and I say always to people that come to visit us, and usually they stay in one of the hotels, and I said to them, listen, everything that you have on your buffet breakfast buffet, from the chicken, from the eggs, to the vegetables, to the fruits, to the milk, to everything, not coffee, that's true, but almost everything, from the pineapples to the cherry tomatoes, to grapes, everything we know to grow in this desert. Now, when you know to do it, you understand that you can do everything. We actually can do everything, and I'll tell you something else. We can do it everywhere. If you know how to control the processes of growing, basically you can do it in Africa, in Asia, in North America, in South America, in the desert, or in tropical climate. And that's exactly what we do, and we can do it basically all over. And that's why the government is investing. And as you know, in Israel, the past few years, the political situation is not very stable. Despite this fact, and despite there is no government budget for the last, now there is, but there was like 4 years without no government budget, this R&D still continued as always, because they understood the benefit of everything. And you see what we're trying to do. We try to increase the profits and the capital gains for the farmers. We want to increase the yields and to be ahead of the market. We want to be self-independent. We don't want to rely on anyone. I'm telling you, I was a year ago, I was in Dubai, and I met leaders from the government, and they almost don't grow anything, and they rely in 98% of their food from importing it. Think about the fragile of a nation that they need to import everything. This is something that no nation in the world want to be so dependent about resources from out of the country. And we want to decrease in the production, of course, to do the production more efficiency. That's why we are focusing mostly to find good crops and to develop the technology and to make sure that Israel is a very expensive country. The labor is expensive, the water is expensive, electricity is expensive, and still we want to be marketable. That's why we need to invest in how to reduce those costs. And of course, from the environmental aspects, which is the most important one actually, is to decrease carbon emission and land degradation. And I want to say about this something. Listen, no matter where you go all over the world, you see it, you feel it, you see it with your own eyes. And all of us that, let's say, been around in the last 30 years, we can actually see it. We couldn't believe it. It used to be like a fairy tale. But now we see it in the temperature out of our houses. We see what's going on to the crops. We see what's going on in almost any aspects of life. And the outcomes is that today the insurance company And by the way, they were the first one to say that something happens with the global changes, the insurance company, because they needed to pay for all the disasters that happened, and we see what's going with the premiums. But we see that almost in everything, from roads, development, new neighbors, everything needs now to be considered about what will happen if there will be suddenly floods that we didn't have. 12 years ago, 13 years ago in my area was the flood that was the highest for the last 100 years. Since then, we had 3 more. 100 years, 1, and then in 13 years, we had 3 more. This is just to give to understand what's going on. This is what we need to prepare. So when we are preparing more land, or more crops, or more roads, or schools, or clinics, or a commercial center, need to be taken in consideration how it will be a sustainable efficiency, and it will be able to survive, to last for many years. What we do is we develop knowledge and we provide it to the farmers, and eventually, if it works, the farmers can turn it into a commercial product that you can use it, of course, and this is part of how we do things. In addition, we understood that the existence of a huge aquifer under the desert, also in Israel, in Sinai, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Iraq, actually, and I don't know the water, the hydrology of Africa, of Eastern Africa, but I'm sure that almost in any place there is something that you can produce water. And by the way, one of the only good things about the demographical growth of the population is that we produce more sewage. This sewage is one of our main resources to irrigate those new lands. So in a way, we took the demographical growth, which is a challenge, and we turn it into using it for growing more crops with the brackish water. This is an example. This is an example how we mix those brackish water with the fresh water or the purified water, and in this way you can provide your farmers water, which is something that water in the desert. It's the story. And this is just an example of some crops, the cherry tomatoes, that today from my region we provide more than around 90% to all of Israel. And we could basically provide even more than the Israel consumption and to export it. And new things that growing in nature, like truffles, and how we domesticate and we did it, and just those examples to see what we can do. And eventually we synergize the technology with the know-how, and we establish some kind of agroclimate technical tech hub that putting up those ideas with the implementation. So basically, you see here the ancient ruins of the Byzantine city with the new farms. This is the way. This is the way that we look at it, and I hope that we will be able to contribute to the world climate changes challenges with what we can do in our area, and hopefully we'll do it in many other places. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to our keynote speech. Thank you very much, Honorable Doron, for your wonderful keynote address. Another round of clap for Honorable. And let's clap too for our chief guest. Thank you very much. Our chief guest, Madam, I know you may have limited time, but we request that you take just a couple of minutes and come in front here for some reflections as we, as the audience and the participants, engage you and Honorable Doron on your keynote address. Honorable, please stay online So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for reflection. I know we started off with wonderful remarks from our PS, Honorable Rebecca Miano, who reminded us a number of key points in relation to how we need to tackle the climate change menace. And she categorically talked on the need to understand that 5% of Kenya's landmass and is arid and semi-arid, and we are currently, as a nation, focusing on planting 15 billion trees. The need to undertake rigorous reforestation was very key. The need for us to invest in indigenous knowledge. And she also focused on the need to do a lot of communication and sensitization in our schools. That already gives our educators a serious, as we look at implementation of education reforms, the integration of climate change issues in our school curriculum become very, very important. And of course, she concluded with an address from a quote from Albert Einstein, that those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act, and that is why we are here. Ambassador Monica Juma, the National Security Advisor to the President of the Republic of Kenya, actually highlighted that we are in fragile times, and the climate fragility is a real threat multiplier. We are challenged with issues of human displacement internally and externally. And of course, we need to recognize the nexus between climate change and security. She emphasized on the need to, in relation to the Paris Agreement 2015, the need to cut carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. And so she actually emphasized to us the message from the UN Secretary General in July, that the era of global warming has ended, and we are in the era of global boiling, and the time to act is now. How do we organize ourselves to act now? And that we need to recognize that our activities around adaptation and mitigation are small scale, and the focus for green growth is paramount. Our chief guest had some takeaways that the value of science remains very, very important. And that actually resonates with Honorable Doron's keynote speech that has focused on how the Ben Gurion University in Israel is using science to turn the desert into agricultural productive places. So our chief guest also talked about rallying common positions on climate change and the issue of climate financing. Honorable Doron has given us a keynote address that practically focuses on how Israel is managing its situation and how it's turning the desert into a farming area. This started in 1947. And the fact that today the annual vegetable output at the desert is in the tune of $177 million. And already 1 million acres of Israel's desert area is under agriculture. And that 45% of all renewable energy is green and is produced from the Negev region, and that the Negev region is an energy leader. And he has also emphasized the focus of Israel on Desert Agro Research Center and public-private partnerships to synergize technology with the know-how of farming. Some of the outcomes that they have actually achieved is when the government invests $2 million yearly, the output is $100 million, which is fantastic. And so some of the goals, including increasing profits, the quality and yield mass, clean energy farms, decreasing dependency on agriculture imports, decreasing production costs and crop loss, and decreasing carbon emissions and land degradation. Allow me to give this opportunity to participants, to us as Gloceps, to the participants. It is a very rare opportunity to have our National Security Advisor in front of us answering our questions. And so please let's maximize the next 5 to 10 minutes to engage her and Honorable Doron on the addresses that they have delivered. Any reaction from the floor? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable. I have thank you very much for the keynote speech that you have made. Actually, very much appreciated. My name is Miller Road. I'm from South Sudan. Yeah, my question is actually maybe to know more about the as you already introduced and give us the brief background and the situation of the climate change, where you actually really stress correctly that is something urgent and therefore need a lot of commitment. Actually, you already mentioned some of this. What I would like to know is whether there are any action in terms of funding at the level of East African Community. And I know that Kenya is a member of the IGAD country, which also you mentioned. The IGAD country was established in 1996 because of the climate change situation. So my question is whether there are any initiative or possibly it has already been done, money to fight the climate change situation in level of East African Community, maybe in East level of IGAD, but also in Africa in general. I know that some countries may not be able to fight the climate change, not because they don't have the money, because also you need expertise, as we have understood from Israel, how they manage to cultivate in the desert in compared to Kenya and South Sudan. I think if you give them South Sudan, definitely they will really be able to produce food for the whole world, surely, you see. So in fact, maybe you can give us some highlight about this in this level of political, yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, our Dr. Biel from South Sudan. Madam, you want to respond to that, please?
Thank you very much for that question, because it speaks to the next steps. And I think part of that has got to be a reorientation in the way we define development. A lot of discussion has been almost a dichotomy around emergency and development. And the question is, can we have clean development? Can we have green development? And I think, to my mind, the answer is yes, we must have green development. And so some of the conversations that we are having, even nationally, is to reorient our budget and align it to some of these programs. For example, when we talk about food security, and you will know that food security is a critical plank of this administration. When the president was sworn in, as he was pulling out the subsidies, he was actually putting in. The only item that he pushed for subsidy was fertilizer. And the argument was that it is extremely important
that we focus on food security, because we were coming from 4 years of no rains in the region, as was being indicated by Honorable Miano. So I think the first step at a national level is to reorient our planning in terms of the sectors that allow for some of these strategies we are talking about, whether it is circular economy. Those of us who are looking at Kenya will know there has been a big push toward the biofuels, and to look at a circular economy where we can produce crops that are going to go through a value chain that provides for green energy, but at the same time without hindering food production. And that is where the role of science becomes very critical. How do you do that mix in a way that is not harmful both to the environment, but also that builds resilience, generates wealth, so that it becomes a circular thing. Now, that is at the national level. There has to be that national discussion. Regionally, there has to be collective engagement so that all of us are speaking together. Now, one of the big issues within the East African region has been the conversation around energy, because I sat in the energy ministry and I do recall the discussions around developing interconnection so that we can develop an energy market, an energy auction, to create a value chain that allows for complementarity based on the competitive advantage. There is no reason why Ethiopia generating a huge quantum of hydro cannot be pushed into the interconnector that allows that energy to be passed on across within the East African region. And that is why there's been a lot of investment that is still ongoing around interconnectors, around the debate, the discussion, technical discussions that are taking place around an energy market auction and so forth. So the idea is to push to the regional level so that we can even begin the investment collectively. And so the discussions we're going to be having in September are not just a common position. It must dovetail into possible compacts of investment across all these areas. There's a lot of conversation about green industry and reducing emissions and so forth and so forth. That discussion must be accompanied by engagement with partners to try and see whether we can have somebody like the investment in the Najib in terms of that technological know-how transferring in terms of technology transfer, know-how, experience into our space. So I think, and that is done more cost effectively in my mind when you do it collectively rather than individually, because you are cutting cost, you are creating efficiency, and with the growing integration of the East African region, I think it becomes very, very easy because the policy framework is there, the regulatory framework can continue to be improved. So I think, Daktari, it is conversations that must take place both at the national level, in fact, starting at the local level, which is why it's quite good that you're going to be having people talking from real life experience on the ground, but it has to be buttressed by the right policies at the national level and the right investment options and preferences provided, and then linked at the regional level in order to reduce the cost and improve the efficiency regionally. But I think with the push towards regional integration, I think this is the way to go because of the argument about scaling. You can't scale just at the community level. It has to be at the regional and probably the continental and global. That is why really it is very, very important to have these conversations.
Thank you, Madam, for the wonderful engagement. Honorable Doron, do you have any contribution towards the conversation that we are currently having in relation to our regional integration approaches?
I want to add just to the understanding, as the ambassador just mentioned, that the big difference between the problems, the environmental problems 150 years ago to today, is that years ago, all the problems were locally, and today we're talking about global. So something that happens in Eastern Africa, maybe the reason is something that we do in Israel and you feel it in Eastern Africa, or the other way around. And this is maybe the biggest challenge, which means that countries that don't know to work together, people that fight, what can we do? And those entities need to cooperate and to give up on their ego, give up on their some of their wishful ambitions, and to understand that without cooperation regionally, and sometimes it's not even in a scale of a continent or an area like Eastern Africa, it's much even bigger. We feel it all over the globe. And I think maybe the biggest message that we need to try to do, and that's why I really wanted, and I think it's important that we will continue those discussions, but abroad, because with all the beautiful and things that we do here and you do there, it's not, it won't do the impact if we won't do it together. And this is a challenge, because we see people, unfortunately, still fighting, countries still fighting. We have so many political problems all over the globe, and maybe the story is someone that told me that those political problems that we have sometimes are very important, but they are like the committee that was supposed to do the entertainment for the Titanic. They can decide about many things, but eventually we're facing a glacier that we're going to hit, and we need to stop it, and not slowing the phase, but to change the direction. And this is something that I think we need to understand for all of us, that it's not stopping it. We need to change the direction, because we're heading to a terrible situation that will influence, by the way, it will influence immediately the poorest people on earth. They don't have the money, they cannot immigrate, they don't have the toolbox to deal with. And this is our responsibility as the public sector, to make sure that the weak won't be the first one to be damaged, and we need to provide them with sometimes food, water, a place to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Doron and Ambassador Monica Juma. I would just accept maybe one or two reactions, because we are running out of time. But okay, Professor Ogara, we can take one from Professor Ogara, and of course from yes, General Njoroge. Please, let's have General Njoroge is near me, and then Professor Ogara, and of course the ladies. Is there a lady we are missing out? Yes. My sister over there. Oh, okay.
Thank you. My name is Ambassador General Njoroge, and I was ambassador in Israel for some 6 years, 10 to 2016. I'm glad to see Honorable Doron. I think I met him when I was in Israel. Let me by thanking Ambassador Monica Juma for the presentation, and also Honorable Doron for the very good presentation. I want to say that for the time I was in Israel, I was able to witness a lot of technology applied in as far as agriculture is concerned. And we tried as much as possible to have this technology. I have a problem with this mic. Can I get that one, please? Yeah, thank you. As I was saying, we tried to see how to transfer this technology, and most people who came for benchmarking were able to visit and see for real, like in the Negev, that the desert had been turned into agricultural land using technology. Yes, as Ambassador Monica Juma said, we need to take the value of science, and we need to finance. We have a problem in this country because many of the proposed investments have not quite taken off the ground. Sitting next to me is Emilio Mugo. And I remember from the University of Negev, we had a plan on how to get arid areas, trees that would be able to grow in our own arid areas. I don't know what happened to that program. He's not there now, but I remember talking to him in his office about doing something. There's also the issue of the Galana project, which faced a lot of political interference. I think if we are serious, we need to understand to avoid politics in some of the projects that are proposed. There is a lot of innovation, and Israel has been open and ready to help us. They are quite advanced in the technology, and we should embrace it and provide for the financing, a budget for whatever projects that are proposed, and to remove politics from some of these technology-based projects that we get from Israel. So I think, Ambassador Monica Juma, being in the government, you need to look into that so that we are able to advance. I'm happy that you understand what is required, and probably you can get the government to do whatever is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador General Njoroge. Professor Gara, just a brief comment, please.
Thank you. I must say that this is a very enlightening morning, having listened to the Minister, Ambassador Monica Juma. We are listening also to the Mayor. We have listened very well on, there are two paradigms here. First and foremost, I want to start by accolading the Kenyan leadership led by the head of state on remaining focused on greening the country. But as much as I say that, I also want to post that the Negev is a desert. Kenyan arid and semi-arid lands are also areas that are climatically challenged. We are focusing on planting 15 million trees, and if I listened well to the presentations, is that our focus is that the arid and semi-arid areas will be an area of focus when planting the 15 million trees. We have also seen the management of the Negev Desert, and the management of the Negev Desert is agriculture-focused, technology-oriented, science in its diversity application in order to improve a sustainable economic mainstay. The ambassador, in responding to a question here, did state that as we move on, we all the time need to evaluate, re-evaluate our strategies, plans, and implementations in order to address confrontations to mankind and to this society as well, where we are challenged, of course, by climate change. We are challenged by food security. We have certain production systems. We have monocrops, which are problems in the lake basin, but we have also seen how societies can micromanage microcosmic areas in order to improve very, very diversified food systems. We need, as we move forward, to reevaluate certain, particularly the planting of 15 million trees is a wonderful thing, but I'm not quite sure about very many strategies around it, but I propose that all stakeholders in science, in departments be involved. Like if you talk about the ecologists, if you talk about the crop people, the forest people, but we retrospectively look at the challenges we have had in those areas, particularly even with the introduction of the so-called drought-resistant trees, vis-a-vis the indigenous trees, and the most maximum value of the arid and semi-arid lands. It edges on policies, strategies, implementation, science, and commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gara. Our sister at the other side. Okay.
Thank you, and good listening to all the speakers, Ambassador. My name is Commissioner Winfred Lichuma. I previously chaired the National Gender Equality Commission, so you definitely will guess where my question is going. A lot of science on climate change, but climate change is not gender neutral. And I liked what Doron said towards the end, that the participation of everyone, communities, the women, the men, persons with disabilities. Now, at the global level, we've been very lucky, and I was privileged when I chaired the National Gender Equality Commission to be the facilitator for the negotiations on gender and climate change. And we did adopt a gender action plan. As a country, we have moved a step ahead from our Constitution 2010, setting up the Climate Change Secretariat. The climate change law, it actually talks about gender and intergenerational focus in terms of adaptation, mitigation, finance, technology, transfer, and the like. So when I got the invite to come to this meeting, I was very excited. By looking at the program, I don't see where we are going to put our science into action with matters gender. Women are disproportionately affected in terms of our patriarchal nature of our society, our laws. We're talking about climate change that is around matters land. And we know only 2% of title deeds are in the hands of women. But we're thinking about the traditional knowledge that they hold, that they preserve. We are looking at the aspects of agriculture. Majority of our women are the ones farming, but they don't own the land. So we're thinking about farming for export, but they need the knowledge. So Gloceps, climate change action plans, without the gender action plan being included, we might be planning to fail. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give an opportunity to Madam to give a response, and then Honorable Doron will close it up. Madam.
Thank you very much, and let me begin with Commissioner Lichuma. I remember a statement from President Obama saying, if you're a coach and you want to win a match, you do not field half your team. Yeah? You do not field half your team. I think there is clear recognition that is not just in climate change, that if we want development that is sustainable, that provides dignity to the people, that ensures realization of the full potential of humankind, then the entire of society must be involved. And that is not a cliche. So the involvement of women, particularly in this discussion, should really be foregrounded at every level, whether it is in terms of the initiatives on the ground, or whether it is in terms of the investment of the specific areas and sectors, or whether it is in terms of fashioning out the strategies and the policies. And there are some specific areas. For example, the question of cooking, clean cooking. Our country has made a commitment that by 2028, we should really have achieved 100% clean cooking. It's very ambitious, but in my mind, it is doable. It is absolutely doable. The effect of that in terms of its multiplier effect, whether it is in terms of the health profile, whether it is in terms of productivity, whether it is in terms of investment and generation of wealth, is clear. So the science is there. And I think what we need to do, as I said in the beginning, is to begin from the point that we are all involved. By all, I mean all. You know, and I really have to underscore the role of women and the youth. And in fact, at the summit, at the Africa Summit, there is a number of sessions that are going to be speaking specifically to the role of women, both in the implementation of the various strategies, but also in the investment. And I see a huge opportunity for women, for example, in off-grid investment, small scale, but also the provision of a one-stop place where the investment opportunities can actually be transferred and to the women, and they can access them, including in financing. And that is why the argument about a specific green growth vehicle becomes very important, because it would have to circumvent all those structural problems that we are talking about. We would have to think about the asset base that we are using, would have to think about the conditionality we put in terms of the elements to allow access to that financing, and we would have to be careful not to use the traditional requirements, you know, the requirements of the titles as part of it. Maybe we should go women groups, for example, as a way of accessing, rather than the use of a title deed or a logbook, which we know probably women will not have it as a first choice. So I think it is the rethinking, the resetting that we are talking about. We must really step away from the way we have been financing, because in truth, a lot of the economic programming has been done by our fair halves, and they have not necessarily been all inclusive or sensitive. The two other questions from General Njoroge and Professor Ogara are really speaking to the question of science and technology. You know, how do we leverage science? And I think increasingly it is becoming clear that if we are going to act at the quantum we are looking at, science cannot be a by the way. It has to be driven by science. We have to deploy AI to determine, for example, what do we do about the pattern of rains? You know, we are all rain-fed in a manner of speaking. We are not going to leap from being rain-fed to irrigation immediately. So what do we do in the interim? How do we use AI to predict rains? How do we use research to have the right seed variety How do we talk about extension services? And these are some of the discussions that are going on in government. Our extension services in this country kind of collapsed. We have not gotten a good hold of them, even as we did the devolution. And that the conversation is, how do we resuscitate, extension farming so that we can begin to sensitize the right practices on the ground. Now, the 15 billion trees, it is true, there's a lot of conversation. We're not just talking about trees. And I think that's why this conversation needs to be global, so that we can have a conversation about what trees, where, with what value. With what value. So that you're just not doing trees, you're doing the right trees in the right place for the right value. So I think this is a whole conversation that is going on right from the research institutes, but we need scale. What we need is scale. And this is really the message I want to leave here. There has been a movement, you all know, in terms of schools getting involved, our institutions getting involved. It has to be everybody, everywhere, at scale.
Thank you, Madam. Honorable Doron, contribution to the ongoing discussion on the parting remarks, please.
Sorry, yes. My last comment, first of all, I want to thank you so much for inviting me. It was very interesting for me to hear all of the speakers, especially the Honorable Ambassador. And I invite all of you to come and see it from your own first eyes what we do here. But I want to say that the last thing is that I think it was the French philosopher that says we need to think global and act local. And this is the message. We need to think global, act local, and it's hard, but it's need to be done because we are running out of time, and many millions of people will be influenced badly with the climate changes, and we have huge responsibility for everyone, and mostly for the next generation, that we want our kids, grandchildren to live in a place that they can prosper. And with the way things going now, this is a big question mark about the future of the existence of the human being in this global. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to give another round of clap to our chief guest and Honorable Doron for the wonderful session. Thank you, Madam. We thank you for your time. Thank you. We kindly request all of you to join us at the side room here for a photo session with our chief guest, and thereafter we shall come back and proceed with the first session that is focusing on the first theme on geopolitics of climate change. Our executive director will lead the chief guest to. We have a photo session. We have a photo session just in the room adjacent here. Please. You join us all. It's big enough for all of us.